A close reading of the Homeric Odyssey, Episode 2, Book 1, lines 44 to 95. My name's Peter Gainsford. I'm a classical scholar in New Zealand, and here we're carrying on with our close reading of the Odyssey in Greek and English side by side. As I said in the first episode, I plan to release an audio copy of this as a podcast in due course. Current plan is that I start doing that after recording about 5 episodes or so. By then, I will have a clearer idea of how this is going to go. Also, I'll say now that I would like to keep each episode to between 20 and 30 minutes, ideally. I may have to go over that occasionally, but I will try and keep it under 30 today. So last time, in episode 1, we had the Odyssey proem, the opening paragraph, laying out some key themes. So, number 1, the naming of Odysseus as something thematically important. We're going to see more of that today. Number 2, some pins put in the timeline to give us a chronological framework, marking out the past, present, and future of the story, which is incidentally, a revealing thing to do, since it shows that the beginning and end of the story have been chosen in advance. So the poet isn't just winging it. This is a planned-out story. And thirdly, the speech that Zeus makes at the Council of the Gods on Mount Olympus, where he highlights the theme of justice, vengeance, but also presents a family, the family of Agamemnon, so that we can set it side by side with Odysseus's family to help us understand what's going on in Odysseus's homecoming by comparing and contrasting with Agamemnon's homecoming. Before we plunge into today's chunk of 50 or so lines, I had better add as a preface that I will be using traditional English pronunciations of Greek names. I want to emphasize that this isn't out of disrespect for Greek pronunciation, whether that's modern Greek or ancient, or kuni, koine. It's worth bearing in mind that for most of the history of in which Homer has been read, most people who have read it out loud have been reading it using kuni pronunciation, which was standard essentially from the 3rd century BCE up until, or at least the end of the medieval period, perhaps for all I know up until the early 20th century. But I am speaking in English, and while I don't expect a huge audience, I do expect that most of the audience I do get will be English speakers. And I don't want to put unnecessary obstacles in the way. I expect most people wouldn't be able to follow if I talked about Odysseus and Penelope instead of Odysseus and Penelope. I mean, it's a hard enough fight trying to get people to use Greek names rather than translating them into Latin anyway, as it is. We're still fighting to get Heracles in place of the Latin Hercules, let alone going for the modern Greek pronunciation Iraklis. It's a long battle, and so it would be baby steps, essentially. So I'll be using the traditional English pronunciations like Odysseus, Penelope, Zeus, and so on. Excuse me. So as I said, we had the beginning of the Council of the Gods last episode. Here we have Athena replying to Zeus, and the passage that we're covering today essentially covers the exchange of views between Zeus and Athena. So, looking at the text in some detail, first thing we've got to notice here is my translation of the word glaukopis. Then spoke to him in reply the goddess owl-faced Athena. Now, the traditional translation in English would be grey-eyed or blue-eyed, since glaukos is a colour meaning sky blue or ranging from sky blue to greyish green to grey. But it's also the word for an owl. and owls are closely associated with Athena. Now, the Oxford Commentary has a note on this, which I had better bring up. So, glaucopis, obviously parallel to boopis, a standing epithet of Hera in the Iliad. These epithets have been connected with a putative theriomorphic phase in Greek religion. That is to say, a phase where gods are depicted with animal features. Like most famously in Egyptian iconography, you have gods depicted with animals' heads, various kinds of animals. However, Athena is never in Homer associated with the owl, as she is with other birds. Vulture in Book 3 and in Iliad 7, swallow in Odyssey Book 22, dove in Iliad Book 5. Glaucs, the owl, does not occur in Homer, though Scorps, the little horned owl, is mentioned in Book 5 at line 66. Presumably the poet connected glaucopis with glaukos, meaning the colour, and understood it as with gleaming or flashing eyes. Yeah, that isn't what glaukos means. It's a colour term. It means it's a colour term used for anything ranging from vine leaves to the sky on a clear day, to, in this case, potentially eye colour. So blue-eyed, grey-eyed would be legitimate translations here, but I like owl-faced partly because it defamiliarises. I mean, Stephanie West in the Oxford Commentary draws attention to the parallel of boopis, which there's no way around that. That means ox-faced. She has an ox's face. And this is so closely parallel that I can't really think that it is entirely unconnected. It is true that we don't have evidence of a theriomorphic phase in Greek religion, as she puts it. But, I mean, it's such a close parallel, it's basically impossible not to think of boopis when you see glaukopis. Beyond that, there's no real certainty on how to interpret it. We do have one or two other animal terms used of gods. Potentially Phoebos of Apollo is something to do with foxes, but there are plenty of other explanations of that. The whole thing is completely uncertain. There's no real certainty there. Let's move on to the actual speech. Kronos' son, our father, highest of rulers, she says, "True right, that man, he lies dead, and well earned." She's talking about Aegisthus, who collaborated in the murder of Agamemnon. But me? It's about Odysseus, destroyer in battle. My heart is distracted, a dissolute man, for desperately long he's in agony away from his family. Now, I emphasize those dis-syllables here because this speech is full of wordplay on Odysseus's name. And this is not well covered in the literature. West's commentary in the Oxford Commentary just says, note the repeated syllables diaphrony dietai. That's in line 48. We've got alam moi amp odysei diaphrony dietai etor. So we've got the deltas there. But there's a lot more to it, and if you look at the Greek text, you will see not just delta sound, not just d sounds, but also in the very next line, line 49, a dissolute man is how I've translated dus moroi. Hos de ta. Again, the d sounds being repeated. And it continues. She goes on to talk about how Odysseus is being imprisoned on Calypso's island, and she refers to Atlas's daughter, Calypso, and she is holding back that dystenon odyromenon man, that distressed man, so despondent. The dys part of dystenon and dys moroi is it's an echo of the dis in Odysseus' name. Similarly with odu in odyromenon, that despondent man. She holds him back constantly with soothing and seductive words. She charms him so he'll forget Ithaca. And the the string of wordplays is capped off at the end of the speech, line 62, with Odysao. Why are you so disgusted, Zeus? This is no accident. Like I say, it's not well covered in the literature. The Oxford commentary, Stephanie West, does comment that the ending of Athena's speech, I quote, was perhaps suggested by ἐπέ μέγας Odyssatos Zeus in Iliad 18 for the implied derivation of Odysseus's name from µ, doomed to odium, in Stanford's translation. See Book 19. There's a backstory given for Odysseus's name there, which links it to the verb be angry, µ. But, I mean, it's not really about etymology as such, it's more about wordplay. And when I say wordplay, I'm not talking about jokes. In Homer and other early Greek literature, wordplay is not... It's not a matter of puns as jokes. It's not the basest form of humor. It's more like word magic. It's a way of trying to encapsulate multiple ideas in a single sound. So when a sound appears in multiple different words, that suggests some kind of mystical connection between those things. As, for example, you get this in religious texts as well. For example, in the 5th century Derveni treatise, there is a bit where it goes on about Kronos' name, Kronos the Titan, and links it to the words kruo and nous, the colliding mind. This kind of wordplay is much more about mysticism than anything else. It's not about humor. Similarly, in one early interpretation of the Iliad, there is a fragment of a work by Theagenes of Rhegion, where he looks at wordplays in the names of gods in the Battle of the Gods in Iliad Book 21, and he suggests that some of these names, some of the gods' names, are significant because of wordplays. Hera is related to the word for air, aer, because it's got the same 3 letters in Greek. Are there any others? There is another one, but I can't think of it offhand. So this is the kind of idea that we've got here as well. There's going to be wordplay on Odysseus' name and on some of the things in Homer throughout the Odyssey. Not every 50 lines. We're not going to have it every session in this close reading, but it is going to pop up again, most famously in Book 9, with the joke on the name Nobody. Sorry, not a joke. I just said it's not a joke. It's more like word magic. There is one good piece of secondary literature on this, and it is Bruce Loudon's article, Categories of Homeric Wordplay, which came out in Tapper 1995. And he discusses this at pages 34 to 35. He quotes the passage and he says, this is Bruce Loudon, he says, what is generally recognized as a pun in the concluding verb µ is actually the capping element of a series of plays on Odysseus' name, as underlined. Odyssei, dus moroi, dus stenon, odyromenon, Odysseus, and Odysao. The text suggests a similar relation between Odysseus' name and these words, and the well-known association with Odysomai, like the verb doustenos, dousmoros, odyromenos, and words such as oisdousas, with the likely pronunciation of... Yeah, that's going into too much detail. I think even Loudon understates the degree of wordplay that we've got in this speech. It's not just the dous sounds, and it's not just odu. All of the d sounds that we get in lines 48 and 49, dai phroni, diataetor, dus moroi, hos de tha, all of this is echoing Odysseus' name. I looked through the Scholia, the ancient commentary, ancient medieval commentary on this passage while preparing for this recording, And it boggles my mind that no ancient reader seems to have spotted these wordplays. There's just no hint of any awareness of it. It's remarkable. I mean, if I underline these here, if you look at the video version and you see this on screen, it's completely obvious. It's kind of relentless, this speech, the amount of wordplay that we've got here. But the ancient commentators don't seem to have picked up on that at all. There is a comment on diaphrony, line 48. It just defines the word, someone who thinks about war or battle. There is a similar comment on dieti, but the words with dus, it just explains the meaning. Dus moroi in line 49, the scholiast writes, he says dus moron, he says Odysseus is dus moros, because he has suffered such a lot in his wanderings. Well, okay, sure, that's the meaning of the word, but the sound of the word is also an integral part of what's going on here. So it's quite remarkable, I find, that the scholiasts just don't pick up on it. To be fair, most modern commentators don't either. So I guess it's not that surprising, but it is. I mean, if I underline it, if you go through and underline the words with deltas in this whole speech, it will be pretty obvious that there is something very intentional going on here. And it's to do with the word magic surrounding Odysseus' name. I did mention last time in episode 1 that moments when Odysseus' name is given or withheld are significant moments. And the wordplay that we see here is part of that word magic. It's not a separate thing. There is one textual. Let's leave it behind the topic of wordplay and think about some textual elements. I have in the annotations to the video version of this episode put some textual notes in the comments, in the description of the video, and also if you look at the video version, you'll see it on screen right now. Notable textual variations. We've got a couple in line 51. Just a quick note that line 51 and line 72 are omitted in one manuscript. This is a fairly normal kind of thing for Homeric manuscripts. I won't pay attention to that too much as we go. This is just the first time that we've had a line being completely omitted in an important manuscript. So I'm just highlighting it here as the first time we've seen that kind of thing. More interesting, I think, is the reading dώματα in line 51, meaning house. This is the line that says, an island of trees, and a goddess lives in her house there. Nesos dendre essa thea den dώματα naiae. The deltas in this line aren't so closely connected to Odysseus' name, which is why I haven't highlighted them. Leave behind wordplay for now. The case, the grammatical case of dώματα is the thing that's of interest here. Some manuscripts have δώμασι, which would mean the goddess lives in a house, or in halls if you want to be ultra literal. But both of the main critical editions, Van Thiel and West, write δώματα, which is the other reading that we find in the manuscripts. And it is pretty clear that δώματα is the correct reading. Now, why do I say that? It's really because of the N that comes just before it. En dώματα naiae. A preposition like en in Homer is also regularly used as an adverb. It's more closely connected to the verb than to the noun. En naiae. She lives inwardly is essentially what that means. She occupies a house in an inside-ish manner. And this is pretty standard for how prepositions get used in Homer. In fact, we've got another example of this just 2 lines up. although there it's accented as a postposition. Philon apopemata pasche in line 49. He's in agony away from his family. Again, you could simply regard apo here as an adverb. He's suffering pains relating to his family, philon, apo, because he's away. That would be, I think, a legitimate reading of that line. And it's certainly what we've got going on in line 51 as well with the N. If you have studied other ancient poets before, you may have come across a term tmesis. This is not a case of tmesis. There is no tmesis in Homer. Tmesis refers to the when you've got a compound verb and you split a preposition away from its verb and then write them, you have other words separating them. That's tmesis. It means cutting. It's cutting a verb in half and then putting the prefix, then some other words, and then the main part of the verb. That's not what's going on here. Tmesis is really an imitation of this kind of thing in Homer. In Homer, it's, as I say, it's about prepositions acting as adverbs. So that's the thing that's going on here. Let's move on to Zeus's reply. I have much less to say about this. There's no real wordplay. It's a bit of a damp squib, really. But Zeus replies to Athena, and he says, "What's this, my child, this word that has escaped your teeth?" This is one of the more vivid images that you get in the Odyssey, which is very memorable. Literally, it has escaped the barrier of your teeth. Ἕρκοις ὀδόντων. It's a lovely image. I think some older English translations do translate that more literally as a word escaping the barrier of the teeth. There is another textual variation there, but it's not a manuscript difference, it's just a difference in punctuation. Van Thiel's edition punctuates this line as an exclamation with a full stop at the end. M.L. West's edition punctuates it as a question, with a question mark. Take your pick, doesn't really matter. It's just a matter of how you interpret the tone of the line. It's not one of those things that can be decided one way or the other. So, Zeus replies, Odysseus, how could I forget the godlike man? And he goes on to point out that Poseidon, the earth driver, always stubborn, he's angry about the Cyclops, or Cyclops, I should say, since I did say that I'm using traditional English pronunciations. He blinded his eye, godlike Polyphemus. His strength is the greatest among all the Cyclopes. And so it goes. There is another textual variation here. Ho'u, in line 70, is Van Thiel's text. West writes ho'o. They're metrically equivalent. I don't think I have formed a strong view on that. So ho'u in Van Thiel's text, ho'o in West. This is based on one manuscript where ho'o was written first and then altered to ho'u. West takes any chance. If there's any basis at all for making the text look more archaic, West will do that. West will make it look more archaic, even if it's relatively minor support, as is the case here. I don't have anything particularly against ho'o. I will say, do I really want to get into the orthography of Homer already? How Homer is written is... Oh my, this is a problematic question. I'll just say for now, in the Athenian alphabet, in 6th and 5th century BCE Athenian script, ho'u and ho'o would look identical. So there's no actual difference between them. And if Homer was first transcribed using the Athenian alphabet, which is quite possible, then there would be no difference between these two readings. That's all I'm going to say about that for now. We need to have a dedicated discussion of that point at a later date. I'm running out of time. Let's move on. Zeus says Poseidon will let go of his anger. He can't quarrel with the gods alone. And then she replied, the goddess owl-faced Athena, if this is what it is, then Hermes, the messenger who killed Argos, let's send him to the island of Ogygia. Get things done immediately. And he can tell Calypso to let Odysseus go and let him return home. And then she says, so Hermes will do that, but I'm off to Ithaca. I'll go there to see his son. I'll send him instead, and I'll put strength in his mind to summon a meeting, the long-haired Achaeans, all the suitors, and send them away. So, this is setting in motion the actual events of that kick off the story of the Odyssey. On the one hand, Hermes is going to be sent to tell Calypso, let Odysseus go, and we'll see that plan put into action in Book 5. But in the meantime, Athena says, I'm going to Ithaca, I'll go there to see his son, and I will send him instead. Now, the texts here. Before I get on to textual criticism, I just want to touch on a thing at the end. I'll send him, Athena says, I will send Telemachus to Sparta and to sandy Pylos to ask about his father's homecoming. Maybe he'll get news, and for an excellent reputation. He'll have that among the people. So, Telemachus is going to win fame, kleos, reputation in his own right. Kleos esthlon, as it's put in the Greek text in line 95. But also the sending Telemachus to Sparta and Pylos, and sandy Pylos. This is setting in motion the events of books 1 to 4, because in book 2, Telemachus is going to set off, and in book 3, he'll arrive at Pylos. In book 4, he'll arrive at Sparta. So this is setting in motion Telemachus meeting up with these grand heroes from the Trojan War. There are some interesting textual things going on here, however. And this is the one I want to focus on first. Spartain, in line 93, is the text printed by every edition of the Odyssey. However, we are told in the Scholia that the ancient scholar Zenodotos substituted Cretin, Crete. I will send him to Crete and sandy Pylos. Now, this is very easy to dismiss because it's obviously not what happens in the Odyssey. Telemachus doesn't go anywhere near Crete. Stephanie West's commentary, just for reference, says Zenodotos read Cretin, and at 285, correspondingly, des Cretin, par idomenea, anacta. These are the strangest and perhaps the most significant of Zenodotian variants, and they raise important questions about Zenodotos' methods. The Scholia tell us this information. It's actually in a scholion on Book 3, line 313. And I encourage you to go, if you can read the Greek, I encourage you to go to the Internet Archive and download a copy of Dindorf's edition of the Odyssey Scholia. I know that a new edition is gradually coming out, edited by Pontani, but this one's free, and it'll do for many purposes. In the Scholion on Book 3, line 313, the scholiast writes, this passage persuaded Zenodotos in the matter of Telemachus's journey that he made it to Crete instead of Sparta. For he thinks, on the basis of this passage, that is to say in Book 3, Zenodotos thinks that because Telemachus is silent and just listens to Nestor, whereas in Book 1 we had been told that he was going to ask questions about his father. Therefore, Zenodotos thought that he must have gone somewhere else where he actually asked questions, and that's why he wrote, I'm going to send him to Crete and Sandy Pylos. Now, I don't think that can possibly be the full reasoning that Zenodotos used. And there is a very interesting article by Steve Rees in AJP 1994, The Cretan Odyssey, A Lie Truer Than Truth, in which Rees argues, Steve Rees that is, argues that what we're looking at here is evidence of alternate versions of the story of Odysseus' return. And he writes on page 158, I propose one such alternative version of the return of Odysseus, keeping in mind that this very hypothetical version may itself be a conflation of various other versions that appears to underlie and to have influenced Homer's Odyssey. In this version, Telemachus went in search of news of his father not to Menelaus in Sparta, but to Idomeneus in Crete. There he met his father, and so it goes on. And there's a whole bunch of external evidence which suggests that Crete does indeed play a very important role in the story of Odysseus' homecoming. Think of all of the Cretan lies that Odysseus tells when he arrives back on Ithaca. He's always claiming to be a traveller from Crete. Well, maybe there's a reason for that. And there is, in fact, a late version which Rees discusses in Dictys of Crete, which is a 1st century CE, essentially a novelization of the Trojan War, supposedly written by someone who was in Idomeneus' army, that is to say, he's a Cretan soldier. And Rees discusses this at page 168. Dictys reports that Odysseus, having lost most of his ships and men during his return, and then having fallen into the hands of some Phoenician pirates, who mercifully saved him, takes refuge in Crete, and he tells the tale of his adventures there, not to Alcinous in Scheria, as happens in the Odyssey. So, there is a significant role played by Crete, and I think it's pretty clear that Zenodotos' reasoning is not just based on that episode in Book 3. There probably is something a bit more to it. Whether it is an actual alternate tradition of Odysseus' return is something open to question. I think Steve Rees has made a very interesting case for that. But it's not something we can ever really be certain about. But it is probably a good idea to bear in mind that there are alternate traditions floating around of all of the things that we see happening in the Odyssey. Variant plot lines are one of the big discoveries of Odyssey studies in the 1990s. There's so much scholarship that came out in the 1990s on the subject of alternative plot lines, alternative events that are encoded in the text of the Odyssey. The most famous one would be the question of whether in Book 19, when Odysseus has his late-night conversation with Penelope, the question of whether Penelope has already recognized Odysseus by that point. Lots of readers, Homer doesn't say that she recognizes him. As far as Homer presents the story, it's in Book 23 that she recognizes him. But even so, lots and lots of readers, lots of modern readers, are still really strongly inclined to think that she has already worked out his identity by that point. And it is perfectly possible that this is a matter of an alternate plotline. There is comparative evidence of a returning hero revealing himself to his relatives before he starts taking vengeance on the people who have wronged him. It is perfectly plausible that there is an alternative version of the Odyssey where Penelope does recognize him. But the question is this actually a story that people were telling? Were there people actually telling stories with these alternate events? Or are these alternate events encoded into the Odyssey that we have, so that we we're meant to think of these potential alternatives as we're going through the narrative of the Odyssey. So there aren't actually alternate versions floating around, rather they're implicit alternate versions. They're only ever implicit. That's something that we can't ever know based on the evidence that we have. Anyway, there are a couple of other interesting textual variants here, but they're more to do with linguistic matters. I've run out of time again, so I'll have to stop here. Thank you for listening. Next time we will move on to Athena's journey to Ithaca, and to go and encourage Telemachus. And also we'll get to meet Telemachus for the first time. Keep on reading Homer. It's always good for you. And I'll see you next time. Bye for now.